What's up, everybody? We are live with the Awesemo Start Sit Show, the Week 8 edition. I am your host, Matt Gajewski, and I am here with Kyle Dvorchak, my partner in crime. You can follow me on Twitter at Matt_Gajewski, and you can follow him at Kyle Tweets here. Our title sponsor today is Yahoo Fantasy. And before we get started, hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you know when this and all other videos go live across the Awesemo platform. On the agenda today, talking all your start-sit decisions. So if you have questions, throw those into the chat, and Kyle and I will answer each and every one of those for you. But first and foremost, we'll talk the news. We'll recap a little bit of Thursday night football. It was an exciting game, and we saw the Atlanta Falcons pick up an evasive win. One of the few this year. I know they've been in some very, very close games that they have just managed to let slip away from them. But I think the big news from this game is actually a lot of the injury situations. Calvin Ridley goes down with an injury, and I believe you have some updates for us this morning on the extent of that injury. But another big one that maybe went a little underlooked is just Christian McCaffrey wasn't activated, and a lot of people expected to see him last night, and we did not. What do we make of the Calvin injury news, and when will we see McCaffrey?
Yeah, so on the Calvin Ridley front, I'm trying to find the exact tweet because I'm not a doctor and I don't remember these things, but I believe it was either MRI or probably I think X-ray on his foot came back negative, so it's not believed to be like a very serious injury. And when I saw him go down holding his foot, like the injury that scares me the most is honestly like the Liz Frank injury, because these guys always are able to come back at some point, whether it's like or just like general like foot injuries, like fractured bones in your feet. These guys come back at some point and are injured almost immediately afterwards. Like we've seen with like, I think Julian Edelman and Des Bryant both came back from the injury only to get injured again. So luckily it looks like he is going to be okay. Maybe he still misses a week or more, but if you have Calvin Ridley, hold on to him because you will get him back at some point sooner rather than later. McCaffrey, I think we should expect him to see him next week. He was a guy who suited up for practice. I don't think he logged it, does not practice, but he did suit up for practice this week, had the red jersey, no contact player, but he's back on the field now. I think we see him probably next week. Calvin Ridley, maybe more like a week or two. Julio Jones probably gets a massive upgrade in that timetable because, we saw it. He got topped 100 yards. I think he scored, if I have that correctly. It was overall just a vintage Julio Jones game. So should see more of classic Julio games as long as Ridley is out. And yeah, congratulations on Atlanta picking up a win. Good job, guys. Really, really evaded you for almost half the season.
Yeah, if you're wondering why Christian McCaffrey wasn't listed on the injury report, he's technically not on the active roster right now. So they do not have to list him with an injury designation. If they do decide to activate McCaffrey, he will eventually probably come up as like a limited practice if he's wearing that red non-contact jersey. But we do have some other injury news on the slate that I think will be pivotal to our start-sit decisions, and a couple really key ones. Michael Thomas returned to practice, and I don't think a lot of people were expecting to see Michael Thomas this week. This at least gives him an outside chance of suiting up. And this is a big question we have for our seasonal leagues. Anytime there's a receiver in this position, it's if Michael Thomas plays, are we going to see a full allotment of snaps? Will he be a decoy in any fashion? How are you treating the Michael Thomas injury in your season-long leagues?
Yeah, so I believe they're also a 4:00 game, correct? So we might not know. I mean, maybe we will. Maybe we get some late night chapter tweets. We might not know. It really depends on the alternatives that you have. If you are, like a lot of my teams, are stacked at wide receiver, I can probably afford to keep him on the bench because maybe, one, I have guys who are playing at the same 4:00 slate or on the primetime slates following, Sunday night and Monday night. If I have guys who are good alternatives in that range, or just a lot of good receivers, I'm probably keeping him on the bench until we know. I'm still not positive we see him play this game. It's just been a weird situation for Michael Thomas this year. If you don't have if you're drawing dead at receiver, or if you just don't have don't have a great team, I would probably take the risk and put Michael Thomas in if we don't get anything leading up to 1 p.m. lock on Sunday. Not entirely sure we see him, but it is very interesting that he could come back this week. It's not a great game environment for Chicago. The Bears, not really offensive powerhouse by any means, so we shouldn't have to see Michael Thomas do a ton to get his Saints offense ahead of the Bears. They also don't have a ton around him. Like Emmanuel Sanders is still on the COVID list. Marquez Callaway dinged up, might come back. I'm not sure on his status yet. I don't think it was a major injury, but they don't have a ton of options. And Tre'Quan Smith has just been so disappointing. So if he plays, I do think we see maybe not 100% Michael Thomas, but 80 to 90% Michael Thomas. And that's still a lot of Michael Thomas.
Yeah, I think you're playing him if he's healthy enough. They've treated him cautiously. So I think even him suiting up would be a sign that he's moving in the right direction. You can play him confidently. Some of the questions from the chat are already rolling through. So the way we'll treat the show, guys, any questions you have, we will answer them immediately. And then we'll talk some of these injury situations, some of these matchups that we're either looking to fade or looking to consider on our season-long teams in between. The first one we have comes from Drop Roses asking about Tua Tagovailoa and his potential viability this week. Now, the first thing with Tua, of course, Miami had Ryan Fitzpatrick playing well prior to their bye, but it seems like this was premeditated that they were going to hold Tua out through the bye unless disaster struck, and it's going to be his team moving forward. And it makes sense. They spent the first round on this guy. He's facing the Rams, and this is probably one of the worst matchups you could throw a rookie QB making his first start into. Are you planning on starting Tua in any of your leagues? Is he just more of a desperation guy for you?
Yeah, I don't think I have any leagues where I'm starting to. We're talking about it for the show. I have like a dozen or more actual, Awesemo being a mostly DFS focused, website. I still have a lot of season-long leagues that I play in. I don't think any of them I'm starting to for the most part, because although I do think his upside as a starter, both for his franchise and for fantasy purposes, is quite high. This week versus the Rams in a game that doesn't have like an absurd total, not really interested in, because in a lot of leagues there are like Jimmy Garoppolo's that you can go out and pick up. In some leagues there may even be like Joe Burrow's you can go out and pick up. So all of these guys, I think I probably have more interest in 1 week. If you're, in a super flex league, I sure hope you picked him up because he does have probably more long-term upside than Jimmy Garoppolo. But in a 1 week sample, I'm still looking at like Garoppolo, Cousins, a handful of other guys who I think had more upside for this specific week.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think he's a 2 QB guy. He's a fringe quarterback, unless you have, some sort of really deep league where you're rostering guys just straight off the waiver wire. Yep. Now, some really good questions coming in. First one we have is Darius Slayton versus Mike Williams. Darius Slayton, of course, not on the main slate for DFS, but still in a very important matchup for the New York Giants. They actually play on Monday night, and they will be facing the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who quietly have been one of the better defenses in all of football. They're allowing just 6.3 yards per pass attempt, and then they are the very best team as far as run defense in the NFL. I do have some concerns with Darius Slayton, and it's mostly from Sterling Shepard returning to the offense. Throughout Darius Slayton's career now, which is actually starting to grow fairly sizable, most of his big games have come when Sterling Shepard has been off the field. So I think that is at least a concern when thinking about Darius Slayton as the number one pass catcher in that New York offense. With Mike Williams, we have just a piece of an offense that's absolutely rolling. And I like taking shots on these offenses that are performing really well. LA in particular is running just a ton of plays. They're 4th in plays per game, 10th in seconds per play. And they've been throwing to creative players. I don't know about you, Kyle, but I think at some point Mike Williams is going to score a touchdown over Donald Parham and Tyron Johnson and some of these other guys Herbert's throwing to. What do you make of the Darius Slayton versus Mike Williams debate?
Yeah, I agree. Not only does Darius Slayton probably suffer from having, more active, healthy pass catchers on his team, but that is compounded by the fact that he is seeing fewer of already bad targets. Like he should at least need like a decent amount of high target share, high air yard share targets to get in like a good game. Now, if Sterling Shepard is going to threaten that even more, those are already bad targets. Now he's even like seeing fewer of them. So he's probably a guy that in most questions, I think he would be an easy guy for me to bench. And like you said, with Mike Williams, he's getting the volume. It simply has been that like there's been a lot of fluky touchdown production from Justin Herbert, specifically that there's a lot of touchdown production and it doesn't go to the guys we expect. I expect if he throws 3 touchdowns in this game, I'm going to call that they go to the top 3 pass catching options and not with guys like Jalen Guyton, who is simply a role player, guys like Donald Parham, who is strictly a backup tight end. So I think if you're on the field a lot, your quarterback is throwing a lot of touchdowns, you should eventually catch some. I don't think that's unintuitive, but needs reminding that we could probably see even better production from Williams, Henry, and Keenan Allen going forward.
Yeah, I agree with you, and we're in lockstep on this. There's another really tough question that just came through. We need to start 2 of these 3 running backs. It's Myles Gaskin, Joshua Kelly, and JaMycal Hasty. There's one key factor I think will make this decision a lot easier for you if we get the news. Tevin Coleman might play. He still has not been activated, but Kyle Shanahan said he was holding out hope that Tevin Coleman could play in this game. So he would be a big deciding factor for me. If Tevin Coleman is out, the question becomes far more difficult. I am leaning towards starting Gaskin because his volume is just locked in. Joshua Kelly is in a timeshare with Justin Jackson, but we've seen Joshua Kelly handle a fair amount of work, and we know he is going to at least be involved in a decent capacity. And we just talked about how many plays the Chargers are running. If we just look at their matchup against Denver, they project to win this game pretty handily. And I know Denver has a good defense, but playing from ahead should lend itself to a lot more run plays for Joshua Kelly. So that would be my lean at this point. I think it's going to be Gaskin and Kelly for me either way, but Hasty, of course, is interesting. What do you make of this situation? Again, it's two of Gaskin, Joshua Kelly, and JaMychal Hasty.
Yeah, I think, we're on the same wavelength here. I think if we're going to see, and we should see Gaskin continue to be essentially a 3-down running back, you lock him in. He is the easy guy to pick out of these guys. And if we're going to see, which I imagine we see from the 49ers, a fairly even split between JaMychal Hasty and Jerick McKinnon, who they were so worried about McKinnon's workload last week that they literally just sat him. I think we're going to see a fairly even split between the tackles. But if they're going to pass to one of their running backs, it is going to be Jerick McKinnon. As underdogs to Seattle, I do expect them to be passing a lot and not being able to run as much. So for that reason, I think you get the 1B or even the 1A between the tackles in a game where between the tackles is probably not how they're going to approach their offensive philosophy. So 8, 9, 10 carries and a target or two? I think I'm going to go with Joshua Kelly here as well. We're in agreement. I think it's easy to put Gaskins ahead and easy to drop JaMychal Hasty out. So that leaves Kelly.
I like it. We have another Chargers question. A lot of you guys are debating starting Chargers, it seems. William has Justin Jackson and Joshua Kelly, but he also has Ronald Jones on this roster, and he can start. It doesn't specify how many, but I think it's just one. And to be honest, in this situation, I don't love to start Ronald Jones here. It was a complete timeshare between Leonard Fournette and Ronald Jones last week. But I still think I'm going to give the edge to Jones in just a better matchup against the New York Giants team that has defended the run fairly well this year, but they project to be significant underdogs in the spot. So that's where I will be going with that one. Do you have a preference between Joshua Kelly, Justin Jackson, and Ronald Jones?
Yeah, I think it's similar. All their volumes project to be similar. I really have no clue what to make of this Chargers backfield. I would say you can reasonably project like maybe Jackson gets a few more targets and then the rush count is almost the same, as opposed to Ronald Jones has a similar script where I don't think he gets a ton of the rushing work. I think we see Leonard Fournette continue to eat into his role. Pass catching upside, probably not much either, but the game script just looks to be so incredibly favorable that I'm going to bank on this Tampa Bay offense continuing to be successful and doing it with, even if it's just half Ronald Jones, that does still give him a pretty good odds of having a few long runs or specifically a touchdown. So it's slight, but I will give as well the edge to Ronald Jones.
All right, Kyle, I swear this isn't a Chargers show. We'll be done with Chargers questions after this, at least for a minute, because we've talked a lot about the runners. But one of the questions we have is just on the pass game, and it refers to Justin Herbert, asking if he would be a solid play. Some other options, it seems like, so there's two Herbert questions. One of them is just, would Herbert be a solid play? To answer your question simply, yes. We'll go into a little statistical breakdown in a moment here because Silver Yoshi brings up Herbert, Burrow, and Tannehill, all options for him as a starter. I happen to think all three are fine options, but I wouldn't fault you for considering Herbert in that situation. A lot of it has to do with the things we mentioned. The overall play volume the Chargers are running. Their matchup is very good against Denver as far as just pure game script. I know Denver's defense has been stout, but Herbert's been extremely efficient himself. What do you make of this? Would you start Herbert over guys like Joe Burrow at this point?
Yeah, I still think I'm going to rock with Justin Herbert here. He's certainly I would much rather target the other game, which both of those guys play in the same game, Cincinnati versus Tennessee. That game is a better game to target. But with how well Herbert's been playing, I don't think he needs a great game to play well because his team runs fast. He throws efficiently. I think he's the number 4 quarterback since he began starting, or, dating back to the Tyrod Taylor injury, if you want to call it that. So he's the number 4 quarterback in that span. I'm going to go with locking in the best of these players, even if it does undoubtedly give me a downgrade in the overall upside of his game environment.
I agree with you. Now, as we get to some of the gross positions, we're going to talk tight end. We do it every single week. We have someone in the chat. They need to pick between Robert Tonyan or Jonnu Smith, who has been not our favorite tight end this year. Mm-hmm. Now, I think this is a similar situation between both players. Neither of them are running a majority of the routes for their team. Robert Tonyan was about 58% last week, but Jonnu Smith ran a season low 41% of Tennessee's routes. Now, Jonnu Smith is far more heavily targeted. He came into the week banged up. So I think we can at least rationalize away some of the limited participation for Jonnu Smith. Do you have a lean between these two?
Yeah, not a strong lean. I guess I will go. I guess I'll go with Johnny Smith here. I think maybe a slightly higher potential for like a back and forth shootout, although, it's not a bad game to target Green Bay either. I just think the volume we're seeing with Devonte Adams is going to dwarf a decent amount of volume we're going to see from A.J. Brown. So if you have so many targets dedicated to one player, it is more difficult for a guy like Robert Tonyan to get involved, whereas Johnny Smith is, I don't know, maybe more involved. Like you said last week, the route participation wasn't great, but he did come in dinged up. They're basically the same player, though. They're guys who play on teams that can score a lot of touchdowns. Their game environments both look to be good this week, reasonably high totals, but they solely rely on touchdown efficiency. So I don't think there's a bad choice here. I also don't think there's necessarily a right choice. I guess I give the most modest of leans to Jonnu.
Yeah, same here. Someone asked about Jonnu and Darren Waller. Just play Darren Waller. You got to take the volume there. All right, let's see here. Ooh, interesting waiver wire. Someone is looking deep, and we need to decide between Jalen Reagor or Rashard Higgins. I'm going to give you the floor on this one, Kai. What do you make of someone targeting just waiver receivers in Reagor or Rashard Higgins?
So if they're starting this week, like if this is a player they have to start this week, I would pretty confidently go Rashard Higgins, just because we really don't know what we're going to see from Jalen Reagor when he returns. We've seen Travis Fulgham absolutely dominate. They've even gotten like John Hightower some work opposite him, being like the field stretcher. I'm not sure what role he comes back into, given that he is this first round rookie they spent a lot of capital on. They could ease him into the offense. I wouldn't want to run the risk of re-injuring my first round rookie in a season where they actually could use him down the stretch to make a playoff run, like shockingly, because of how bad the NFC East is. But on the other hand, Rashard Higgins seems to be fully stepping into the Odell Beckham role, led the team with, I believe, 6 targets, 6 catches, 110 receiving yards, didn't even manage to score either on that pretty reasonable volume. Is it an offense that I love targeting? Absolutely not. We saw even Odell Beckham wasn't able to produce like consistently big games. But if you're going to get some semblance of that role, whether it be 70, 80%, I think I will lean with him this week. But undoubtedly, Reagor does have more upside as a first-round talent coming out of TCU. He looked like, I don't know, I didn't think he was too far off from a guy like DJ Moore, just a guy who incredibly athletic. I thought he could have a very expansive role early in his career. Do we see that from this week? I'm not entirely sure. Whereas I can say, at least in terms of market share numbers, maybe it's not the best team to target. But Rashard Higgins will probably have a more ample role in this week, maybe next week. But in long term, if this is a guy you're just sitting on your bench, I do think Reagor is the choice.
We're in lockstep on this. I don't love Rashard Higgins just because I think a lot of people are looking at Rashard Higgins. The real question I think we should be asking is, like, did you want to start Jarvis Landry before Odell Beckham got hurt? Like, you're talking about a number 2 pass catcher at best on the Cleveland Browns. And how attractive is that on a week-to-week basis? And given the choice that you laid out, I agree with you. It still probably is Higgins, but at some point, I think we just want to move to other higher upside situations. Ooh, Devin Singletary versus Justin Jackson. This is actually a really tough one because the Bills are quietly finding themselves in what seems like an increasingly better matchup by the day. It looks like the Patriots are going to be extremely banged up heading into this game. And Stephon Gilmore might not even play. I know he doesn't really affect Singletary, but I think it does affect overall defensive output. The Bills are favored. They're playing at home. The total's not great. Singletary's in a timeshare, but so is Jackson. I think I might actually lean Singletary in this spot. What do you make of this?
Yeah, they're two. It's another spot where these are very similar players in that neither of them are going to see, like, maybe they project to see a 50 split, a 55-45 split of the backfield carries. But one of them is massive favorites over a defense that now at this point doesn't really scare me at all in the Patriots. And the other one is Justin Jackson in, reasonable favorites against the Broncos as well. But I think if there's one of these games that I think the offense can put up more points, I'm still going to lean slightly with, Devin Singletary and the Bills putting up more points than Justin Herbert, at least through the ground, especially because I think, if anything, if the Chargers have a big offensive performance, it probably continues to come through the air, whereas the Bills could actually get it done on the ground. I don't love either of these guys because I do think they have backups that take a ton of volume away from them. We've seen both the red zone and the overall rush attempts for Devin Singletary plummet whenever Zach Moss is on the field, as he will be this week. But it is a great matchup in terms of being a big favorite is good for a guy like Devin Singletary, who's not a ample pass catching back. So I'll give him the slight lean, both just committee backs in decent spots.
Yeah, I agree. And Guys, before we move on, you can get access to all of the great Awesemo Plus tools, all the tools that Kyle and myself use, all the tools that Alex Baker creates, and content for nearly every DFS sport out there with an Awesemo Plus weekly pass for $29.95. This includes full access to all the premium content and tools in Awesemo.com, including player projections, ownership projections, our weekly premium Slack channel, and much more. Only looking to play NFL? Then sign up now for our weekly NFL package for only $14.95, or give our NFL Weekly Express Pass a shot for just $3.95. You can also get Awesemo Plus Platinum Weekly Pass for only $10.31 when you use promo code PUMPKIN at checkout. Get it? Pumpkin. Tomorrow's Halloween. That's nearly $20 off the original price. This package includes full access to all Awesemo Plus features, including player projections, ownership projections, our premium Slack channel, lineup builder, and much more. Again, that offer is valid through Halloween, hence the promo code PUMPKIN. So make sure you check that out. It's also a great tool for season-long leagues. Like, even just the player projections are so valuable here. And I use that a lot, just breaking tiebreakers. When we have these questions, like Singletary versus Justin Jackson or whoever it may be, a great thing you can do if, Kyle and I aren't on air to just pepper questions at us, go check those projections and see. Awesemo is as accurate as they possibly come. Now, getting back to the questions, again, thank you guys so much for all your questions. Throw the thumbs up button. It helps Kyle and I out a ton. We will continue to answer each and every one of them. We have Brandon Ayuk versus Fulgham, the receiver of Philly.
That's interesting. I think I'm still, oh man, this is like the ultimate, like receiver comes into a large role. They get a great matchup. I think I'm going to go with Fulgham because we have essentially just seen more of his volume regardless of matchup, basically since he has entered the fray as the number one receiver. It's like double-digit target games. He's getting a decent amount of air yards, I think, in his first 3 starts, or close enough to starts where he's actually getting volume. He had over 100 air yards per game. I'm going to go with Fulgham here because they're essentially the same player, but Fulgham has a small but a reasonable sample of 2 to 3 games where we actually know he is going to be the number one receiver. Whereas, do we know Brandon Ayuk takes on that role? Well, probably doesn't take it over George Kittle, whereas we could actually see, we should expect to see Fulgham continue to be not only the number one wide receiver, but the overall number one pass catcher for his team. So I'll go with Fulgham here. They're similar, but I think we just have a stronger sample on Fulgham being a 8, 9, 10 target guy.
Are you worried? So we don't know for sure that Dallas Goedert's returning. It seems that there's optimism he could. Rieger's going to return, and we don't know what capacity either of these guys could play. Are you concerned about that for Fulgham at all, or do you think he's played so well that he's locked into a role?
I would be concerned about that, but those are, if both those guys are active, then he gets lowered to the level of Brandon Ayuk. His floor, essentially, in terms of the volume I would project him at, is Brandon Ayuk, where his ceiling is, Diante Johnson or something of that range, a guy who's essentially the number one receiver on his team. So I think his floor definitely comes down if those guys are active. And a side note, you should go pick up Dallas Goedert in every league you have because he's going to come back and absolutely smash. But given that, moving back to the question, I think Fulgham's floor looks something like Brandon Ayuk's median projection right now.
I like it. I tend to agree with you. I had just such high hopes for Ayuk coming out of school. I just have these bad priors for making decisions with him. I want to play the gadgety receiver who is ripping off these 90-yard scores at Arizona State. But ultimately, siding with the data and evidence pointing to Travis Fulgham over the last few weeks, I think he is the play. We have another Chargers question. This one's because it's a good hypothetical. It's Justin Herbert versus Josh Allen. And Josh Allen has been in a little bit of a slump. He got off on a red-hot tear to start the year. Draws what seems like a difficult matchup at first, but again, not sure if we'll see Stephon Gilmore facing the Bills this week for New England. Is Josh Allen bouncing back?
Oh, yeah, that is tough because it was incredible. He was MVP, basically second to Russell Wilson MVP candidacy up until this streak of difficult and bad games. Just simply hasn't played well. He's looked like the Josh Allen we saw from last year and that many people expected to see this year. I don't know, man. I think I'm actually going to go with Justin Herbert here. Neither of these totals are crazy. Neither of the defenses are ones we're targeting. But at this point, maybe I'm not confident in saying this, but I would give a slight lean to Justin Herbert simply as a passer right now, the way Josh Allen has played throughout his career, save for 5 games this year. And then you add in these extra 2 games where he looks like old Josh Allen. I'm going to give Justin Herbert a slight lean. And although Josh Allen does offer a lot as a runner, Justin Herbert isn't a zero as a runner as well. So he even has a very competitive angle from that aspect where you might not expect so, given that Josh Allen is kind of known as this wild runner. Justin Herbert does offer you some equity with his legs. So I'm going to go with Herbert here, actually.
There's some people interested in Ben DiNucci in the chat, of course, assuming Andy Dalton sits. And I think everything is pointing to Andy Dalton sitting at this point. Just an absolutely vicious and ruthless hit Andy Dalton took. I'm not surprised to see him not pass concussion protocol just yet. Are you interested in DiNucci in his place? We've seen this Dallas offense be explosive to start the year. Obviously, their offensive line has been a major concern of late. They just continue to undergo injuries. Any interest in DiNucci?
I mean, like, not really. I mean, I do actually have him in one Superflex league that I had.
You would, of course you do.
Yeah, I do have some DiNucci because in this, it's like a Superflex Dynasty tight end premium league. But it's best ball, so you don't have to manage it. I know that's what you don't love about some of your season-long leagues. You don't have to manage it. So I picked up DiNucci on the fact that, one, he is like a modest rushing player. Like, he does offer some equity with his legs. He was like good at an FCS James Madison school, right? But I think it was Pitt that he like didn't even play. Like, he was basically got benched multiple times at Pitt. I don't think he's a very good player, probably because like 3rd string quarterbacks are almost never good players. But if he offers something with his legs, if his team literally has no other choice but to throw 50 times, he is an okay play.
I think that's the perfect way to describe it. If you're on waivers, I certainly prefer Garoppolo. I prefer Kirk Cousins. But Tua, yeah, we talked about Tua earlier. He would be someone I prefer as well, despite the tough matchup. We got a funny question here. If Jamison Crowder's out, who are we gambling on in the Jets offense? Are we taking some Denzel Mims or are we going some LaMichael Pirine? You knew we weren't going to make it through a show without talking the Jets, Kyle. You knew we weren't.
Yeah, man. So yeah, not only does it look like, I think I don't remember who tweeted it, but there was the Jamison Crowder suffers a setback, does not practice either yesterday, or maybe that was the upcoming like report for today. But regardless, it seems like, typically a late week setback is not a good sign. I don't think we'll see him. Rashad Parriman, I believe concussion has already been ruled out. I don't think we'll be seeing him. I'm pretty sure he was already ruled out. That leaves like Jeff Smith, that leaves Denzel Mims. And we saw Denzel Mims step into a pretty significant role when he came back. I do think because they spent some draft capital on him, and he was an interesting, not a perfect, but an interesting prospect coming out of Baylor, I believe, he is worth some shots on. I do think off the waiver wire, there are probably better pickups. But when we talk about like guys you can pick up for potentially some long-term value throughout the season, he does fit that bill, being an interesting prospect. They spent high draft capital on him. His team has no choice but to throw because they're so incredibly bad. Not the most efficient throwing team, but we've seen Jamison Crowder make the most of it. We could see it from Mims. I still think, though, there are probably a lot of better options off of the waiver wire as of right now. He really only enters the fray in like my deeper leagues, which I play in many deep leagues. So
yeah, he breaks my rule to not play any Jets. But I mean, I'm in one season league that's been ravaged by injuries. I've considered some Jets at various points this year, particularly at running back with Pirine. You've heard all about this league, Kyle, so I won't belabor the point anymore. Another interesting flex, Giovanni Bernard, if Mixon sits, or Brandon Ayuk. For me in this situation, I'm just going to take the volume with Giovanni Bernard. He saw 5 targets last week, immediately stepped into 18 touches. Mixon previously had been averaging 23.7 touches per game. And we did not really see any other backs handle a sizable workload whatsoever. So I think in better scripts, Giovanni Bernard should approach those same touch totals that Mixon had. And what we like most, I mean, he's a good pass catcher. He lacks a little bit of the same between the tackles ability that Joe Mixon has, but the pass catching ability is there. What do you make between Ayuk and Giovanni Bernard, assuming Mixon sits?
Yeah, so on the Mixon, Jones, probably Ingram, maybe Carson front, just to tie them off all really quickly. I don't think we see any of them play. None of them practiced as of Thursday, and all of their injuries were rumored to be like multi-week injuries. Yeah, basically, I know Mark Ingram, Aaron Jones, Joe Mixon were all put as 1 week out as of right now on their original injury timetable. In regards to Giovanni Bernard versus Brandon Ayuk, yeah, I completely agree. Just take your locked-in volume of double-digit carries and probably 5+ targets. They're not throwing to Samaje Perine. They're not running with him either, but they're definitely not throwing to him. He's a 0 as a pass catcher. So if they're going to throw to their running backs as much as they have recently, that probably means that not only do we see the normal Giovanni Bernard role, but he also takes on the Joe Mixon role. That is like, he probably has more upside than like as a pass catcher specifically than Joe Mixon had on his own right. So absolutely taking Giovanni Bernard here. You just lock in the volume and move on.
I think so too. There's some other follow-up questions about the Cincinnati offensive line. Their center is out this game, and they have a couple other guys questionable. Do you think that's a big factor? Would you be willing to downgrade a player if their offensive lineman, in particular, I guess in this situation, their center is out? How does that affect the team?
It would take a slew of injuries. And I do think like offensive line play matters so much, but it would take like multiple injuries for me to really consider it. And we have seen this with with the Philly offensive line, and even before like the Dallas offensive line, although obviously the quarterback play now kind of trumps any other considerations. But we've seen it with these offensive lines that have really struggled. Like, had Miles Sanders not broken off like back-to-back games of 74-yard runs, he would have been dusted in both those games. He was getting stuck behind the line on every single carry he had, outside of 2 carries in back-to-back games. So I do think it does matter, but it probably takes more than just one injury. And Giovanni Bernard, I'm not targeting him for his between the tackles role. I'm targeting him for the targets. So if anyone is sort of insulated to those kinds of woes, it probably would be a guy like Giovanni Bernard. So it is worth considering on the extremes, although one center being out, I don't think reaches extreme levels. They have been nicked up in other spots too, though. I think like Jonah Williams got hurt at one point. I have no clue if he's healthy or not. A few guys that have been hurt for them, but it really does take like 3 to 4 guys and like prominent guys, left tackles specifically, to be out for me to really pay any attention to it.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. It looks like Jonah Williams is questionable. We'll see if he ends up playing. Let's see here. Do we think the Colts Browns is a sneaky shootout spot this week? This is actually a good question. So a question I had on the list that I wanted to get to is like, is T.Y. Hilton dust? So I want to get your take on, do we just bench T.Y. Hilton at this point? Like, what do we do with him? He's been out targeted by like Zach Pascal and like Marcus Johnson. Like, things have gotten bad in Indianapolis for the Colts leading receiver, or seemingly so. And then I guess on the Brown side, are you willing to take a stab? We already touched on Higgins, but we could throw this to Harrison Bryant and some of the fringier plays as well. What do we make of this game?
Yes, I mean, the game has like a pretty reasonable total. I don't think it's still not, it's coming down a little bit. Actually, it's coming down a lot, but it opened at 55 and a half. Down 5 points still leaves it above 50 points. So it's not like, I guess people are betting the under, big money coming in on it, but they're still betting the under on it coming into a reasonable total. It's just not going to be a massive, massive shootout, at least based on Vegas. So do I think it's a sneaky shootout? One, I do think people generally just recognize all the good spots. And two, given that the total is coming down, I know there's some caution with the win totals, which like, as opposed to like rain or temperature outside of like negative degree games, wind is actually one of the only real impacts that the weather can have. Is it does have like a reasonable impact on quarterback accuracy, like statistically. So once it hits certain thresholds, it does look like there's going to be a lot of wind. So talking quickly from a DFS angle, this is a game that, you can check out our other shows. Go to the Awesemo Podcast channel on most podcast platforms. You can check out me just talking about how I want to fade this game. Do I think you should still be playing the main plays from this game? Yeah, like I'm not that much like in my season-long leagues. I'm not like trying to be contrarian. I'm trying to get the most points. So Kareem Hunt, great play. Rashard Higgins, a good enough play if you have to, get grimy off the waiver wire. And on the other side, the obvious plays, like you've got Darren Waller getting a ton of volume. I forget what question it was. Someone threw out Darren Waller versus someone else. You play Darren Waller. I'd be shocked if anyone has, like, if you have Travis Kelce and Darren Waller, if you have George Kittle and Darren Waller, not sure how you got those guys on the same team. Good for you. It looks like it might be paying off now. Start them in the flex, start one of these guys in the flex. You're not for any reason benching Darren Waller, even if I'm maybe lower than this game on the public. And T.Y. Hilton, I don't know, he has a game of 9 targets. He has a game of 10 targets. He's also been outproduced most recently by like Marcus Johnson and Zach Pascal. I think he's just like a deep, like an upside wide receiver 4, frankly.
Yeah, for clarification, these are 2 offenses we're looking at individually. These teams aren't playing each other. Indianapolis is playing Detroit. Cleveland's playing Las Vegas. So I think they're 2 offenses with concerns. Indy being just so run heavy and their main pass catcher and T.Y. Hilton just not being as active in the pass game as we thought. Again, they'll be facing Detroit. That game has a total above 50 points. Same thing with Cleveland taking on Las Vegas. Cleveland is another team that's been very run heavy. They just lose Odell Beckham. And again, I think the main thing with this Cleveland offense is, did you really want to play Jarvis Landry when Odell Beckham was active? Like, do you want to go to the number 2 receiver in this offense? And I think it does stem down to the tight end with Harrison Bryant, too. He's someone that ran a route on just north of 50% of the dropbacks. Again, did you want to play Austin Hooper? And I think he was in play because tight end is so gross. But ultimately, I'm trying to get to other plays if I can. Like, I think someone I would rather play that's available on the waiver wire is Irv Smith, who saw the same target volume and ran more routes than Harrison Bryant. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I agree. I think he falls in that tier of guys that you can pick up off the waiver wire that could get you some production. That's about all you can say. They could get you some production. They are getting a decent but not full workload. We have a very small sample on Harrison Bryant, and David Njoku wasn't completely uninvolved. He was a lesser part of the offense, but like 10-15% target share on the Browns probably doesn't cut it if they have a lead. So I agree. Irv Smith, a better play. I'll throw this one back to you. Harrison Bryant versus Evan Ingram, a guy who's been so incredibly disappointing. People spent a lot of draft capital on him. I give the slight lean to Harrison Bryant. I just think, like, we have seen, not only has Evan Ingram's, like, his targets have been good, but he essentially has no air yards to back them. He is just a check down guy, and even his check downs are inaccurate because they come from Daniel Jones. So I think he is probably one of the easy guys who I can just say, if there is a modest option off the waiver wire, you can bench Evan Ingram. You can probably even cut him, honestly.
Man, I hate that question. I don't want to start either of them. If I had to, I feel terrible about it, but it's going to be Evan Ingram, and it's based on targets. That's all it is.
Yeah, he gets a lot of those.
He gets targets, and maybe one of them ends up being a touchdown. Unlikely, but if it happens, great. Before we move on, guys, I love the questions. Keep them coming. Today's show is sponsored by Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports. Check out Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports. They are the most trusted name in fantasy sports. Yahoo DFS now includes CSV upload and CSV edit features for those looking to play multiple lineups. Make better choices. Choose Yahoo Daily Fantasy. Looking to, a good one here. A game I am particularly interested in. It's someone asking about this Packers and Minnesota Vikings game. Do we think Justin Jefferson is a confident start against the Packers? I personally love the Minnesota stack. I think if you're looking to the waiver wire, Kirk Cousins should be one of your top priorities. And this stems down to Jefferson. At this point, I think he's earned at least the trust from me to be considered a wide receiver 2 in most fantasy leagues. What do you make of Justin Jefferson?
Yeah, the offense is so condensed that being the number 2 on a team that still runs the ball a lot is not that bad, because they hardly throw it to their tight ends. We finally seen Irv Smith pop up, but for the most part, that just means like less Kyle Rudolph. They have a modestly used tight end, a pass catching back, and 2 receivers that they play. So although they're not maybe the most exciting passing game to target, they do basically just play with the most condensed target share you can find between Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson. So yeah, as the second receiver on a passing offense that is limited, but still good, they're not like inefficient like some of the awful offenses we've talked about previously, I think he's completely a confident wide receiver 2-3 start. Like, I can't imagine, I'm sure I don't have any leagues where I'm not starting Justin Jefferson the way he's played. And this game environment, quite good, a 51-point total. It's coming down as well, but it's still one of the higher totals on the slate. So yeah, Justin Jefferson, if he's going to be even modestly involved in a game that should feature a lot of scoring, perfectly fine starting him as my number 2 receiver.
Let me ask you this then. On the other side, Allen Lazard has returned to practice. It's similar to a Tevin Coleman, Christian McCaffrey situation where we're not actually getting practice reports from Allen Lazard because he technically hasn't been activated yet. But it seems there is at least some optimism he could play this week. Is he an immediate upgrade over MVS? And would you be looking to start him maybe in some leagues?
Yeah, so it's funny. We probably had this conversation like 4 or 5 weeks ago about what to do between these 2 guys. And I was always on the train of, well, they're giving Marquez Valdes-Scantling more looks. Even though I like Allen Lazard more, I'm going to follow the volume. Marquez Valdes-Scantling is just bad. It's just not going to happen for this guy. And with that, you'll probably find me playing some of him in DFS. But as soon as Allen Lazard steps back onto the field, he is absolutely an upgrade over MVS, who's just done absolutely nothing with his top 10 air yard share in the league. So once Allen Lazard turns, and I don't know if that happens this week, basically how IR works this season, it's only a 3-week, it's a 3-week minimum that you're out. And then once activated, you have 3 more weeks to actually be on the active roster. So I'm not sure we see Allen Lazard this week. Whenever we do see Allen Lazard, he's like a fringe wide receiver 3-4, and he probably makes Marquez Valdes-Scantling worth cutting.
Interesting question here. Should I drop Devonte Freeman, Zach Moss, or J.K. Dobbins? I like all those backs, so assuming you don't have to drop them, I wouldn't drop any of them. If you're forcing me to pick, I think it's probably going to be Moss, and I don't feel great about it. I think Devonte Freeman's injury doesn't project to be long-term, and he should function as basically a 3-down back when healthy. Dobbins, I think, could have some viability down the stretch, just earning more of a role. Mark Ingram is banged up right now, and that injury appears a little more severe than they initially let on. He hasn't practiced yet this week. There will be some form of committee there between Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins, but it's an explosive offense. And if Dobbins is able to carve out an extra role for himself, I think he could be a good play. Moss, I don't ever see fully usurping Devin Singletary, so he would be the guy I would cut out of those three. What do you make of this?
Yeah, you laid it out. Moss, if one of these guys has to go, we jettison Moss because no, I don't ever see him. I'm completely agreed. I don't see him being anything more than a committee back and probably the lower end of the committee. Whereas J.K. Dobbins, you could even argue the same thing about him. Sure, if you want to say that, you can say that J.K. Dobbins probably never completely usurps the combined might of Gus Edwards and Mark Ingram once Ingram is healthy. But I will take the committee back on the one of the best rushing offenses in the league versus a Bills team that now seems to be struggling a little bit. They're a good but not unstoppable rushing attack, and they haven't even been that good this year. Devin Singletary's been kind of dusty. I don't think that's entirely his fault. I think it's because they're just not they're not a powerhouse offense, and when they are, it's because they run hot passing. So I'm going to go with leaving Zach Moss on the free agency, on the waiver wire, simply because I think the other guys have either more secure volume in Devonta Freeman once he's healthy, or more upside as being basically the same level of usage on a better offense in J.K. Dobbins.
Agreed. We're in lockstep. A gross question from the waiver wire, it appears, at quarterback. We have three options. We need to start one. It's Drew Lock, Daniel Jones, or Jared Goff. Who are you taking, Kyle, between Drew Lock, Daniel Jones, and Goff? You got to answer the question.
It's not Drew Lock. I can rule that one out. I think just when you look at these guys, he's probably the worst. I'll go with, I don't know, man. I'll go with Daniel Jones. I think he probably has the most upside. Yeah, I'll say he has the most individual upside between his crazy rushing production, which has been, he's an incredible athlete. It's just that his passing abilities are lacking at best. They're pretty bad at worst. So I'll go with the rushing upside in Daniel Jones because we know, simply put, that Jared Goff isn't going to throw more than 25 times a game if his team has their way with their opponents. Looks like that's going to happen this week against Miami. So I'll go with Daniel Jones. I don't love it. I don't even really like it, but I guess he's the best guy. Oh, man. Tough scene.
Daniel Jones is going to have to throw. That's all I know. Will it be efficient? Remains to be seen. Probably not, but he's going to throw the most out of Goff and Lock, and I'm fairly confident in that. Let's see here. I've had CMC stashed since injury. Someone wants to trade me Devonte Adams for him. Should I? I would. Assuming you have a decent stable of running backs, I think Devonte Adams is a very good play. And I don't know, what do you make of this? Would you trade Devonte Adams for McCaffrey?
I would not trade. I want Devonte Adams. I wouldn't trade Devonte Adams for McCaffrey. I would keep Devonte Adams, and I think this is framed the other way. I would definitely take Devonte Adams for McCaffrey.
Okay, sorry, that was a bad framing of the question by me. Let's make it an either or. Do you prefer Devonte Adams or McCaffrey?
Yeah, I do think you still run the risk that McCaffrey either one gets re-injured, where there obviously just isn't that risk right now. Devonte Adams. Two, he comes back another week or two later, and as we look, we have. What is this, week 8? We'll have 8 games left in the rest of the season. You're missing, 12.5% of your season if McCaffrey even just is delayed by one more week. So I'm probably going to go with Devonte Adams, who these guys are basically the same thing. They are just the most used running back or the most used player at their respective position. Devonte Adams at receiver has just been mind-bending. Christian McCaffrey, when healthy, the same thing. I'm just going to go with the lower risk, but almost the same reward option in Devonte Adams. And I think there's at this point it's probably close to zero, but not a impossible chance that Mike Davis just steals a reception or two every single game from Christian McCaffrey. And that lowers him from the best running back in the NFL by a wide margin to maybe number 2 behind Alvin Kamara. So I think there's just similar upside with these guys, but 10 to 15% more risk with Christian McCaffrey. So I'd take Devonte Adams.
I think you're right. And it's been a very small sample this year, but we've seen Mike Davis actually play slightly more efficient football than McCaffrey. Again, McCaffrey played for about a week and a half. So take this for what it's worth. Another question coming in from Corey. What are we making of the Dallas offense now that we're down to Ben Denucci, essentially? He specifically asks what we're making of CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper. And he has, yes, I have them both.
Yeah, so I think with CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper, we can talk about these guys. I mean, they're basically going to be discount for some sort of form of your Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins players, where the efficiency for Joe Burrow has been fluky at best. It's been some rough games, some good games. I think maybe they lean more on the side of rough games, but also Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb are probably better than those guys just as talents. So I think you are having probably low touchdown upside, lots of target volume, and Michael Gallup just gets pushed to the fringes. He's probably a guy who's hardly worth rostering. I think the interesting conversation is not about those guys, because they will have enough volume, assuming this is PPR, to sustain themselves. It definitely caps their upside, but they're going to get the ball a lot. Won't be as efficient, but that's okay. You know, they're still going to survive and be like wide receiver 2-3s every week. What do you do with Ezekiel Elliott now that he's basically like 2019 Le'Veon Bell or like David Montgomery? Because I truly think at this point, he probably just is like a RB2. Like the offense is so bad and so much of his production is based on having a good offense that allows him to run the ball 25 times a game. That is not going to happen as long as they're playing Andy Dalton, Ben freaking Denucci. I think he's David Montgomery.
All right. So I want to cycle back to CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper. I just want to say I agree with you. And I think, you know, it doesn't really affect their talent. They obviously without Dak Prescott, I think more than anything, it just renders them more volatile. So congrats to you, Corey. You're probably like 6-1 or 7-0 because you probably had all these massive Dallas blow-up games with CeeDee and Amari. At this point, I think you're still starting them and confidently so, but you just have to know there's going to be more ups and downs with these guys. And you're probably just not going to have the big 30-point games for two of them in the same week. Now, as far as Ezekiel Elliott, I do agree with you that Ezekiel Elliott has looked very, very bad. It's just with the state of running back right now, I just don't know who you're going to play over him in your seasonal leagues. Like I think based on the draft capital you spent on him and the touches he's receiving, you probably don't have a choice, right? Am I wrong on this?
No, you probably don't have a choice. I would just say set your expectations lower. Maybe there are some teams, if you took Zeke at like 103, probably, there could be some teams that got some interesting running backs at like the 2-3 turn. And then if you picked up James Robinson, I actually think there are probably like 2 to 3% of teams out there that have James Robinson and went 3 running backs in the first 3 rounds and are considering starting James Robinson over Zeke. I actually he's not playing this week, so you don't have that choice yet. But given I'm not sure who their opponent is when they come back, I would actually think James Robinson, I probably project him for more points than Zeke. So suck it, Zeke.
Never thought it would come to this. We're talking UDFA, James Robinson. We already talked about him over Fournette. Now we're talking about him over Zeke. It's been a wild 8 weeks, my friend. Before we move on, there's tons of free content on Awesemo every single day. And today for free content, we have the NFL Express Stacks tool. Fantastic tool if you're playing DFS. We have MMA rankings, another fantastic fight card this weekend. And of course, probably one of the best values you're going to find across the web as far as sports betting goes, the Awesemo Odd Shopper tool. Check this tool out. It's a fantastic, I really like it for player props. You can use it for all sorts of spreads, totals, lines, everything you could want. But for player props, you literally just type in a player's name. It brings up all of their various props across sports books. Odd shopping is very important. Now, you do this for almost everything. You find the best price available, and why would you not do this for your sports book as well? You can head over to Awesemo Odd Shopper to browse a number of the top books and find the best bet on the market. That's oddshopper.awesemo.com. You can sign up there to track your bets. You can get alerts when bets hit a certain price, and it's all free. So make sure to check that out. And again, another thing you could even use in your seasonal leagues if you're trying to break some ties. See what these bookmakers are projecting for your players. Now, back to the questions. We have about 10 minutes here. So if you have any last-second questions, throw those into the chat. Kyle and I will get to as many as we can. In the flex, we have Darius Slayton versus Giovanni Bernard and T.Y. Hilton. I'll keep this one pretty simple. I think you're just going with the volume in Giovanni Bernard. We hit on him already. He's Joe Mixon light. No one else is playing on the offense, and while he's not as efficient as Mixon, the volume is there, and I'm chasing that. Anything to add there, Kyle?
No, we've had the Giovanni Bernard conversation. You just, assuming this is like PPR, you just lock in your 5+ targets every week, Giovanni, as long as Joe Mixon is out.
Okay, I knew this was going to come up, and it's finally here. We need a flex. It's Rashard Higgins, Darius Slayton, or my main man, Nelson Agler. Tell me why you're starting Nelson Agler in this situation.
What was it? Darius Slayton, Rashard Higgins, and Nelson Agler? Do I have that right?
That's the 3.
Oh, no, I don't know, man. I guess, I don't know. I think I go with still Darius Slayton because I think his team probably has the most passing upside, although I think you could argue maybe the Raiders have that same level of passing upside in terms of just overall attempts. You know, Daniel Jones isn't very good, but when he throws a lot, that does give Darius Slayton a decent amount of upside. I'm going to go with Slayton because I think he is the best receiver of these 3, and there's not a lot of difference between the offenses. Cleveland probably has the best quarterback play, I guess, but they also throw the least, whereas the Raiders as underdogs would probably throw more, have like middle, maybe actually the best quarterback play out of these guys. I don't know. I still go with Darius Slayton because I think he's just better than these guys by a lot. Man, tell me about Nelson Agler. Why should I not vomit when I hear his name?
I mean, I can't argue that you shouldn't. I think there's reason he might be the wide receiver 1. And I'll qualify that by saying Darren Waller is the pass catcher 1 no matter what. So at best, Nelson Agler is your pass catcher too. I do have worry with Agler that Ruggs will take on a larger role, and this may be wishful thinking because John Gruden is literally running Ruggs on nothing but go routes. And I mean, Nelson Agler is being used in a similar way. He's got most of his targets coming downfield. So to sum this up, I'm in agreement with you. I do think Darius Slayton is the play out of these three options. We have another flex. It looks like it's Diante Johnson, Devonte Parker, or T. Higgins. Out of these three, assuming you can only pick one, it's Diante Johnson for me. In every game he's played most of the snaps, he's been hurt many times this year. He's seen double-digit targets, and I think at this point we can clearly label him Pittsburgh's wide receiver one. So give me Diante Johnson. Again, it's Johnson, Devonte Parker, or T. Higgins. Any difference for you?
No, it's Johnson by a pretty clear margin, averaging 12.7 targets per game in the games that he plays, just over half of the snaps. Like, he doesn't even need to finish. If we just get this man into the second half, he's probably a lock for 8 targets. So I'm going to take the volume and the talent. He's quite good too. Like a rookie breakout season with the combination of Devlin Hodges and Mason Rudolph is quite impressive. Following it up with being the clear number one receiver in Pittsburgh. Yeah, I'm going to go with Diante Johnson pretty easily.
Josh Jacobs or Jerick McKinnon in the flex. It's just give me the locked in volume in Jacobs. I like McKinnon. I can't really rationalize him being benched last week I know it was for maintenance or whatever you think it was, but if it happened once, it could happen again. So I'll take Jacobs as just the safer play. What do you think?
Yeah, completely agree. Jacobs does leave the field on third downs for other backs. It's not great, but he's going to see at least 5 or 6 more carries than Jerick McKinnon. And his floor is that, yeah, he gets a lot of carries. He doesn't get any targets and it's not a great game. Apparently Jerick McKinnon's floor is just getting rested. So I'm going to go with the better overall median projection in Josh Jacobs.
Devonte Parker or Juju Smith-Schuster. Give me Devonte Parker here. It's a tough matchup into his first start, but still Devonte Parker has one of the better target shares in the NFL when you exclude the weeks he's been hurt. So give me Devonte Parker there. What do you make of Smith-Schuster versus Devonte Parker?
Yeah, I'm simply going to need to see more than one decent game from Juju Smith-Schuster in terms of the volume. I know he had a double touchdown game, I think, to open the year, and then another touchdown game 2 weeks later, but the volume has simply not been there. Eric Ebron, James Washington, Chase Claypool, Deontay Johnson, I think James Conner have all had games where they saw more targets. Last week, it was either 14 or 15 targets, but until I see a reasonable target share for more than one game, I can't keep going back to Juju. I go with Parker as well.
I never thought we'd get to this point, but we have a question. Are we going to roster in our seasonal leagues T.Y. Hilton or Henry Ruggs?
I don't know. I still go, oh, man, that's tough. I guess I'll go with Henry Ruggs. I think, what's the point of rostering T.Y. Hilton with what we've seen so far? You basically just want him for, you hope he brings down 5 catches for 40 yards. I don't think that is winning you any game. Sure, if it was just who do I think scores more points this week, I'll give a slight lean to T.Y. Hilton. But who do I think gives my team more overall points by the time the year is over from, week 8 onward? I think it's Henry Ruggs. I think in weeks 10, 11, 12, he could actually just be a full-time player getting a lot of air yards in every given week. He's going to smash. I don't know if we ever see a T.Y. Hilton smash game again. So I'm going to go with the upside play because I think the floors are not awfully dissimilar. T.Y. Hilton, sure, he's going to get more looks, but is it that much better than the potential upside you bring with Henry Ruggs? No, it's not, I don't think.
I think you're right. And I think when we're looking at overall ceilings for these players, I think Henry Ruggs is a bigger ceiling than T.Y. Hilton at this point. And it pains me to say a little bit. I actually had pretty high hopes for T.Y. Hilton this year, but I agree with you. We have Le'Veon Bell versus James White. And now I want to stick to this a little bit. James White is not playing the same role that he played under Tom Brady. I think a lot of this is just the function of Cam Newton. He's siphoning so much away from these runners, and the way he's playing, it's just not as conducive to targeting running backs out of the backfield. We saw more of a timeshare between Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Le'Veon Bell than I ever expected last week. So in a smash matchup for the Chiefs, let's call it a revenge game. Oh, yeah. Give me Le'Veon Bell.
Yeah, I mean, this is the most nonsense narrative hand in the dirt take, but we're going to see Le'Veon Bell get he will be in the fourth quarter just running laps around the Jets because that is what he literally, it was so funny. The 3 teams he was rumored to be signing with were the Jets' next 3 opponents after last week. He is going to come out here and he's probably going to score 2 touchdowns on 10 carries because there is no way he doesn't go in for the revenge game. This is the dumbest take I will ever spew on this show, but in your season long leagues, there's not much of a median difference between a guy like James White, who is a now not awfully greatly used pass catcher, and Le'Veon Bell, who's a 1B back. But the spot just sets up for not only for like the Chiefs offense is 10 times better than the Patriots at this point, but like adding in the little extra narrative juice, I think Le'Veon Bell is the choice here. It's not great. I don't feel great about it, but if there were one of these guys who has multi-touchdown upside, I can tell you it sure as hell ain't James White.
Oh, it is certainly not James White. And that's like a 4 running back rotation at this point. Not interested. Let's see here. We have JaMychal Hasty versus Henry Ruggs in a PPR league and a flex. Oh, this is tough. Okay, so assuming Tevin Coleman is out, I think I'm going to give the slight lean to Hasty, and it's going to be based on overall upside. I think Hasty's played well enough to work his way into some form of committee. How it splits up with Jerick McKinnon, I'm not entirely sure, but I'm also not confident in Ruggs' workload either. He just had 3 targets in his most recent game. I believe 2 and 3 targets since he's been back from injury. What do you make of Hasty versus Ruggs?
Yeah, I'll go with Hasty as well. It's only a slight lean, and it's probably because I'm just not as interested. But I don't think we see a shootout in the Cleveland game. And I think with Henry Ruggs not playing a full-time role, you do need a lot of plays to be run in that game for him to get on the field enough where I'm confident. Whereas we're going to see a shootout with Jimmy Garoppolo versus Russell Wilson. Garoppolo's fine, but the Seahawks defense is so bad that he doesn't have to be any better than average to absolutely go off. When I think I can get a player in a game that has a lot of points, it gives him a lot of upside. Do I think the floor is great on either of these plays? No, obviously not. We could very much see JaMychal Hasty get game scripted out of this game. That would be a very low floor play for him. But he does have at least one, if not multi-touchdown upside as a committee back in a game that should feature a lot of points. So I give the lean to Hasty here because I think his ceiling is probably overall higher this week.
Agreed. T. Higgins, Hollywood, or Galladay. So I'm assuming we're only picking one of this bunch. I am going to go with Kenny Galladay. I think the target share is between, I'm going to rule out T. Higgins right away. It's between the 2 alphas in Marquise Brown and Kenny Galladay. Marquise Brown, the higher target share, but it's a lower volume offense. We look to Kenny Galladay. His target share is a bit depressed right now, and I think it's mostly because of the injury. But then we look to his overall target output. It hasn't been great. He hasn't often eclipsed double-digit targets this year, and he actually has a 7-target average over his last 4 games. That's not great, but I do think this game environment is slightly better for him against Indianapolis, and it's a tough matchup, but it's a game with a 50-point total. We know Detroit is going to have to throw to Galladay. I just slightly prefer him in this spot. Again, the hypothetical is T. Higgins versus Marquise Brown versus Kenny Galladay.
Yeah, it is. I agree. We can completely rule T. Higgins out because he's probably a number 2, if not a number 3 receiver, where we have 2 other obviously number 1 receivers. And I simply throw out Marquise Brown because although I do think the Baltimore-Pittsburgh game is interesting, could feature some points, on the median projection, which is just what I'm looking at in a simple season-long start-sit question, is his team plays slow and they run more than any other team in the NFL. That doesn't leave a lot of room for him to have a massive game. At least Kenny Galladay, that I actually think is a spot where we could see his team throw a lot more than we see Baltimore throw this week. They kind of, they play similar roles in terms of their volume, but one offensive output should be higher in terms of their passing attack. So Kenny Galladay, Marquise Brown isn't a bad decision over him. I think the upside is probably just as similar. I just think the passing attack for Baltimore scares me, and T. Higgins wasn't ever really considered for me.
It makes sense. Now, we don't have any more shows tonight, guys, but tomorrow we have a whole slew of shows as we do all weekend. Of course, on Sunday, we have the 4-hour marathon show before you set all your lineups. Tomorrow, we kick off our shows with our college football show. It is myself and Ben Raza at 9:45 Eastern time, so make sure to check that out. Of course, if you miss any of these shows live on YouTube, you can always catch them on your podcast network of choice. Maybe you don't want to open up YouTube, you just want to listen through the audio. Wherever you get your podcasts, we will be there for you. And of course, thank you guys for watching. You can find me, Matt Gajewski, on Twitter at Matt_Gajewski, and he is Kyle Dvorchak. You can follow him at Kyle Tweets here. We will be back again next week for the Week 9 Start Sit Show. Same time, same place. Thank you guys and have a great weekend.